My wife, Leona, was the kind of woman who made the air feel warmer just by being in the room. She had that rare talent, making strangers feel like friends and friends feel like family. Her laugh was the music that lived in the walls of our apartment, and her presence, no matter how quiet, was grounding. The 7:15 train to Milwaukee was never supposed to be goodbye. It was a routine trip, one she'd made a dozen times before for a regional teachers' conference. I dropped her off at the station that morning, coffee in her left hand, her fingers brushing my cheek before she kissed me quickly, murmuring, "Be good to the day." Then she disappeared behind the sliding doors like a scene I didn't realize would replay in my head every night for months. When the call came, I was pouring cereal for our daughter, Mira, 11 years old, hair still tousled from sleep, wearing Leona's old hoodie like armor. I picked up my phone expecting a work update. Instead, I got silence, then static, then a man's voice. "Are you the husband of Leona Rivers?" I knew before he finished. I knew. I didn't cry at the funeral. Not because I didn't want to, but because Myra's fingers were wrapped so tightly around mine, her knuckles pale, her face frozen. She looked to me for strength, and I gave her every piece of it I had left. I stood straight as they handed me the folded flag. Leona had been an army spouse. That entitled her to a ceremony, a salute, a line of condolences that meant nothing when the person you loved wasn't coming back. I remember how the casket looked, silver edges, a soft white satin interior like they were dressing death in peace. But nothing about it felt peaceful. Mira kept watching the casket like it might open. She didn't blink, didn't speak. And in that eerie silence, I became something I didn't know I could be: hollow. The world faded around me as the preacher read verses about eternal rest, while I stood next to my daughter, my body physically present but my mind screaming through the emptiness. After the ceremony, people came back to our apartment with too many casseroles and not enough silence. I smiled at them. I nodded. I even said, "Thank you" more times than I can count. But in truth, I wanted them gone. I wanted to sit in the dark and let grief have its way with me. But I didn't. Because Mira needed structure, familiarity, a parent who wouldn't shatter in front of her. So I played the part. I tucked her in every night. I made pancakes the way Leona used to, with chocolate chips shaped like smiley faces. I hummed old lullabies and combed through her tangles the way her mother did. And every time I passed by her bedroom, I didn't look. I slept on the couch, not because I had to, but because the smell of her shampoo on the pillow would have been the end of me. Mira asked questions. Of course she did. Did it hurt? Did she see it coming? Will she still hear me if I talk out loud? And I answered the best I could. I said things like she didn't suffer, and she'd want you to talk to her. The truth was, I didn't know if any of that was real. But she needed hope. I couldn't give her Leona back, but I could give her something that felt like belief. Nights were the worst. Mira would stand in the hallway sometimes, just standing, like she was waiting for something. One night, I found her curled up by the bedroom door, her cheek pressed against the hardwood. "I thought I heard Mom's footsteps," she whispered. My throat clenched so tight, I couldn't speak. I just sat beside her, wrapped my arm around her shoulder, and we stayed there until morning. I went through Leona's things in slow, unbearable increments. Her winter coats, still with receipts in the pockets. Her lesson plans for the next semester. Her favorite earrings, the ones Mira always said made her look like a princess. I didn't throw anything away. Couldn't. I packed them in labeled boxes and stored them in the closet like I was preserving sacred scripture. I left one of her scarves hanging on the coat rack. Mira liked to touch it on her way out the door. Friends meant well, but grief doesn't have patience for pep talks. "You're so strong," they'd say. Leona would be proud. But they didn't see me crumble in the shower, fists pressed against tile. They didn't hear me scream into a towel just to let something out. I learned how to function, not how to heal. I paid bills. I checked homework. I even remembered to water the plants. But healing? That was something I couldn't fake. I used to wonder if I was doing enough, if I was honoring her memory the right way. But the truth was, there's no guidebook for losing the person who made your life feel like home. Mira and I were floating in a world that no longer made sense, tethered only to each other. And I made a quiet vow, never spoken, just etched into the marrow of my bones, that I would protect her, fiercely, from everything this world would try to take next. I would never be the man Leona fell in love with again. That man died with her, somewhere between the rails of that cold track. But I would be the father Mira needed. And if that meant letting my own grief sit in the shadows while I showed up every single day for her, then so be it. That's how I survived the ashes of goodbye. By building my life from them. For her. The day my father asked me to sign over the deed to our apartment, I was standing at the stove, making Myra's favorite, mac and cheese with breadcrumbs, baked until golden. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind Leona used to fill with jazz records and warm socks. Mira was humming something off-key from the other room, and for a moment, I let myself believe things were normal. Then my phone buzzed. "Come by when you get a minute," Dad had said. "We need to talk about something important." I didn't think much of it. Maybe he wanted to check in on Mira. Maybe, God willing, he'd finally figured out how to grieve properly instead of stuffing his emotions in a drawer labeled weakness. So I drove over, left Mira with Gloria for an hour, and found myself once again stepping into the house where I had been raised and overlooked. Dad sat at the table, the same table I used to do my math homework on. A folder was already open, and I caught the flash of property documents before I even sat down. "I want you to transfer the apartment to Troy," he said, as casually as if he were asking me to pass the salt. No preamble, no sugarcoat, just a direct command, like I was still the child and he was still the unquestioned authority. I stared at him for a long second, waiting for the joke. It didn't come. "You're serious?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his worn gray sweater. "You've had your turn. You and that little girl have had enough charity. It's time your brother gets something too." Charity. That's what he thought it was. Not the home I'd built with Leona. Not the kitchen where Mira took her first steps. Not the windows that held the city lights she used to dance under with her mother. Just some handout. A temporary loan of grace that he could recall whenever it suited him. "That apartment was Leona's dream," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "She picked every wall color. She planted those stupid balcony herbs. And Mira, she feels close to her mom there. That place is all we have left." Dad's face didn't move. Not a flicker of empathy. Just stone. "And Troy has nothing," he said coldly. "He's struggling. He needs a win." I almost laughed. Troy, the perpetual screw-up, was always struggling because he refused to do anything that resembled effort. He bounced between jobs, burned through relationships, and treated consequences like suggestions. But because he could tell a joke, because he knew how to make Dad smile and slap his back like a drinking buddy, he was golden. The fun son. The easy one. "I'm not signing over anything," I said, finally. "Mira and I live there. It's her home. You don't get to reassign it like a parking spot." Dad's jaw clenched, and there it was, the look I knew too well. The one he used on me growing up when I cried too easily or asked too many questions. That tight-lipped disappointment that said I was failing some unspoken test of manhood. "You'll regret that," he muttered, gathering the folder and snapping it shut. Maybe it was a threat. Maybe it was a promise. But it settled in my stomach like a lead weight. I stood up and walked out without another word. When I got home, Mira was sitting on the floor sorting Legos by color, something Leona used to do with her. She looked up and smiled. "Daddy, can we bake tomorrow?" "Yeah," I said, ruffling her hair. "We'll bake something sweet." That night, after she fell asleep, I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the framed photo of Leona on the nightstand. Her eyes were caught mid-laughter in that picture, when whipping her hair across her face, some beach trip we took years ago. I wondered what she'd say if she saw what was happening now. Her husband being asked to hand over their home like a used sweater. I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying Dad's words in my head. "You've had your turn." As if grief had an expiration date. As if fatherhood was something I could pause or reroute. But the deeper cut wasn't his demand. It was the realization that even now, after everything, he still didn't see me. Not really. I was the fill-in son. The utility. The one who didn't stir up drama but also never made the room laugh. I could be bleeding, and he'd hand me a napkin instead of a bandage. And yet, part of me wasn't surprised. My entire life had been a series of small concessions made in the name of family peace. I took smaller portions so Troy could have seconds. I gave up college visits because we couldn't afford trips for both of us. I moved back to the city when Mom got sick, even though Troy promised to take turns. But this was the line. Leona's home, Myra's sanctuary, I wasn't giving that up. Not for Troy. Not for anyone. The next day, I made photocopies of the apartment's original paperwork. I emailed them to my lawyer with a simple message, just in case. I wasn't taking chances. I also dug up the original letter from Leona's mother, who had helped us with the down payment as a wedding gift. Her handwritten note said, "For the family you're building together." It made my chest ache. I tucked it into a folder labeled, "Proof of Ownership." By the end of the week, I started noticing little things. A car parked across from our building too often. A sudden noise complaint filed against us that made no sense. Gloria mentioned seeing Dad in the building lobby, lingering. I didn't know what he was planning, but something had shifted. This wasn't over. But I had something he never would, a reason worth fighting for. I wasn't protecting property. I was protecting a memory, a promise, a daughter who still tiptoed at night, hoping her mother would come home. And if he wanted to push, he'd find out what it looks like when the sensitive son stops backing down. Growing up, it was always Troy this and Troy that. My younger brother had a talent for charming everyone within a 10-foot radius. He was the kind of kid who could crash his bike into a neighbor's fence and still get invited in for lemonade. Teachers gave him second chances. Coaches called him spirited. Even when he failed with a grin that somehow made it okay. Meanwhile, I was the one who followed the rules, who cleaned up, who kept quiet when things got loud. And yet, the praise? The warmth? That was always reserved for Troy. Even now, years later, it hadn't changed. My father still looked at him like he hung the stars. Troy, the golden boy. Troy, who'd somehow stumbled into a decent-paying job at a sports marketing firm thanks to a friend of a friend. Troy, who still showed up late to family events but got away with it by telling a joke. Troy, who once pawned our mother's heirloom bracelet, something she wore on her wedding day, just so he could buy front-row concert tickets for a girl he dated for 2 weeks. And my father forgave him with a chuckle and a pat on the back. Boys will be boys, he said that night, while I stood there silently wondering if they knew how much that bracelet meant to her. I always wondered what it would take for Dad to look at me the way he looked at Troy. Not just glance, but really see me. As a man, a father, a person who didn't need to crack jokes to be valuable. I spent years chasing that approval. Good grades, clean clothes, a dependable job, marriage, fatherhood, stability. But none of that earned me the seat at the table that Troy had just by showing up. So when I told my father no about the apartment, I expected anger. I expected some kind of argument. But what I got was worse, a cold, measured silence followed by a single sentence. You'll regret that. At first, I thought he was bluffing, just huffing out the last of his disappointment like he always did when things didn't go his way. But in the days that followed, I could feel something tightening around us, like the air before a storm. Mira noticed it too. Grandpa's been texting me more, she said one morning, sliding her phone across the kitchen counter. He wants to take me out for milkshakes. I stared at the screen. His messages were oddly enthusiastic. Too much smiley faces. Too many exclamation marks. That wasn't him. That was bait. I didn't respond. I didn't forbid her either. I just asked her how she felt about it. I don't want to go, she admitted. He's different since Mommy died. I nodded, kissed her forehead, and told her she didn't have to see anyone she didn't feel safe around. That seemed to comfort her. Then Troy showed up at my building. He called from downstairs, asking to come up. Just want to talk, bro, he said. Don't want drama. Against my better judgment, I buzzed him in. He waltzed through the door like he owned the place, wearing designer sneakers and a hoodie I recognized from a limited drop. He looked around the apartment and let out a low whistle. Still nice, huh? He said. Great view. I folded my arms. What do you want, Troy? He grinned, plopping down on the couch like it was a reunion instead of an ambush. Look, man, I know this whole apartment thing got tense, but Dad's right. You've had this place for years. Maybe it's time you moved on. Moved on. Like losing a wife was the same as trading in a car. Like this home was a pair of shoes I'd outgrown. I stared at him for a long time, the silence between us thick enough to choke on. I'm not giving it up, I said. So if Dad sent you here to convince me, you're wasting your time. He laughed, a short, dismissive burst. Come on, man. You're holding on to it like it's some sacred ground. It's just an apartment. You can get another one. I felt something twist in my chest. You don't get it, I said, barely keeping my voice steady. This isn't just an apartment. Leona chose this place. She made it ours. Mira has memories in every corner. Her growth chart is still marked behind the kitchen door. He shrugged. Then take a picture of the wall. You'll be fine. I didn't realize I'd stood up until I saw him flinch slightly. Get out, I said. He raised his hands, all mock innocence. All right. Chill, man. Just thought I'd try the diplomatic route. As he walked to the door, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. You know Dad's not going to let this go, right? He's got connections. Let him try, I said. He left without another word. But I stood there for a long time, staring at the door like he might come back. He didn't. Instead, the silence returned, thick and full of dread. That night, I dug through the back of my closet and pulled out old letters, receipts, anything that tied Leona to this place. I photocopied every lease renewal we ever signed. I made backups. I scanned and emailed them to myself. And when Mira was asleep, I sat on the floor of her room, just watching her breathe. I thought about the word regret and how my father wielded it like a knife. If he wanted to turn this into a war, he'd picked the wrong man to threaten. Because I wasn't just a son anymore, I was a father. And I'd already lost one half of my world. I wasn't about to let him take the other. There's a strange rhythm that sets in after tragedy. It's not quite normal, but not entirely broken either. It's like learning to walk again. Same legs, different ground. I woke up each day at 6:15, just like before. Made coffee. Packed Myra's lunch. Smoothed her hair into a ponytail while she stared blankly into her cereal bowl. We moved around each other like survivors of something invisible, waiting for the next tremor. I went back to work, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. Sitting at home made the silence too loud. My job didn't offer much comfort, but it gave me a script to follow: emails, numbers, schedules. No time to spiral. Mira was quieter these days. Her drawings, once full of pinks and yellows, now leaned toward grays and browns. She stopped asking about Leona. Stopped asking if I thought Mommy could still hear her. She just started carrying one of Leona's scarves in her backpack, twisting it in her hands when she thought no one was looking. I let her. Some grief doesn't need words. It just needs space. With everything going on, I couldn't be everywhere at once. So I reached out to Gloria, our neighbor from 2 floors down. Retired nurse, widowed, the kind of woman who kept peanut brittle in her purse and always had a tissue tucked in her sleeve. She'd watched Mira a few times before, back when things were simpler. She adored my daughter, and more importantly, Mira trusted her. So it felt safe. Just for a couple of hours, Gloria, I said one afternoon over the phone. I've got a dinner meeting with a client Thursday evening. I'll be back before bedtime. No problem, sweetheart, she said, warm as always. We'll bake something. She needs sweet smells in that kitchen again. That Thursday, Mira didn't want me to go. She stood at the door in her socks, fidgeting with the hem of her t-shirt. Do you have to? She asked, voice low. I'll only be gone for an hour, I said, kneeling to zip up her hoodie. You love baking with Gloria. Her eyes darted away, down the hall. It's not that. What is it? She shifted uncomfortably. Grandpa's been weird. He called yesterday. Asked if you still left the back door unlocked sometimes. My stomach dropped. And what did you say? I didn't say anything, she said. I hung up. I forced a smile. That was the right thing to do. And the door's locked now, okay? You'll be fine. But as I kissed her forehead and stepped out into the hallway, that unease clung to me. I shook it off like a bad dream. Told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was trying to reconnect. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I drove downtown, showed up at the restaurant, smiled through introductions, nodded at slide decks I barely absorbed. The whole time, something buzzed under my skin like a wire pulled too tight. I checked my phone 5 times in 15 minutes. No messages. No missed calls. Just silence. Everything okay? My client asked between bites of grilled salmon. I gave a rehearsed smile. Just dad life. You know. But I didn't finish my drink. I didn't stay for dessert. Something felt off. Not just uncomfortable, wrong. Like a door left open in a storm. I excused myself 20 minutes in, stepped outside, and finally called Gloria. No answer. My fingers tightened around the phone. I called again. Still nothing. I tried the landline. Then Myra's cell. Still nothing. That was when panic set in. I ran. I didn't wait for valet. I sprinted 3 blocks to the parking garage, keys shaking in my hand. I tore out of that lot with my hazard lights still blinking. My phone buzzed just as I turned onto our street. I answered on instinct. And what I heard made my heart explode. Daddy, help. Her voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. Screaming. Screaming like her throat was giving out. I didn't hang up. I didn't speak. I just slammed my foot harder on the gas. The world narrowed into a tunnel, streetlights blurring past, horns honking, tires screeching. I ran 2 red lights. I don't even remember parking. I just remember flying out of the car, stumbling through the lobby, hitting the elevator button 6 times before taking the stairs 2 at a time. My breath was gone. My hands already curled into fists. When I opened that front door, time slowed. Gloria was nowhere in sight. My father stood in the center of our living room, hunched over, one hand wrapped around Myra's neck, the other yanking her by the scalp. Her little body was kicking, scratching. Her face was beet red, eyes wide with terror. And she wasn't screaming anymore. She was quiet. Too quiet. Something inside me snapped. I let out a roar I didn't know I had, charged across the room, and tackled him. He stumbled back, crashing into the wall. Mira collapsed to the floor, gasping, sobbing. Her voice finally broke through again, but it was weak, choked, shredded. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms. She clung to me like she was still falling. Her hair was ripped out in chunks. Her neck was ringed with red welts. I could feel her whole body trembling. I turned and looked at him, my father, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, now standing with his hands still balled into fists like he didn't know how to stop. She raised her voice, he barked, as if that explained everything. She needed to be reminded. That was the moment I realized there was no saving this. There was no coming back from this. He hadn't snapped. He had planned it, waited, slithered in through whatever opening we gave him. And the worst part? My mother stood by the doorway, not saying a word. Her arms were crossed, her face impassive. When our eyes met, all she said was, "You're a disgrace." Not to him, to me. That night, while Mira slept on the couch wrapped in every blanket we had, I paced the kitchen floor like a caged animal. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stared at the coffee pot, empty, untouched, at Leona's recipe book on the counter, at the scarf still hanging by the door. And I knew what I had to do. No more silence. No more second chances. That night, I filed a police report. And in the morning, I filed for a restraining order. The scream didn't end when the call dropped. It lived in my ears. It pulsed in my throat, thick and hot, like I'd swallowed fire. I don't remember driving. I don't remember traffic lights or turn signals. I remember the shape of the steering wheel beneath my white-knuckled grip, the way the world became blur and panic, my body one long muscle of instinct and dread. Daddy, help. That voice. My daughter's voice, splintered into 1,000 terrified shards. When I burst through the door, I didn't call out. I didn't ask questions. I moved. The living room lights were on. The TV was playing some forgotten cartoon at low volume, the kind of background noise Mira usually used to fill the silence. But what I saw center stage, what stopped my breath mid-inhale, wasn't the couch or the forgotten bowl of popcorn on the rug. It was my father, standing there like he'd never left, one hand around Myra's neck. The other gripped a handful of her thick hair, yanking her back at an unnatural angle. His mouth was twisted in rage. His teeth were clenched like he was holding back more violence than what I was already witnessing. And my daughter, my world, was red-faced, choking, her small hands flailing uselessly at his arm. No words. No cry for help now. Her screams had been used up. All that remained was silent terror. I didn't think. I charged. My shoulder hit him full force. We crashed into the side table, splintering the lamp, knocking framed photos to the ground. I didn't care. I didn't stop. I hit him again, slamming him into the wall. His head knocked hard against the plaster with a dull thud. He groaned, tried to shove me back, but I had the fury of a father, and he had nothing but old strength and warped pride. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to the front door, flung it open, and shoved him out onto the hall floor. "Come near her again," I said, voice like broken glass, "and you'll leave in a body bag." He sat up slowly, hand on his temple. She raised her voice. He muttered like it was justification. She needed to be reminded. Reminded of what? That monsters come in family clothing? He didn't answer, just stared at me, blinking like I was the one who had lost my mind. And for a moment, I did feel crazy, like the world had tilted so far off its axis that I'd landed in a place where this man, my father, could look at a child he nearly strangled and feel justified. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I turned around and saw Mira. She had crumpled in on herself, knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly, her breathing fast and shallow. I dropped to the floor beside her. "Sweetheart," I whispered, trying to touch her shoulder gently, but she flinched hard. "It's okay," I said, throat tight. "You're safe. I'm here." It took her a long moment to look at me. Her eyes were glassy and far away, the way I imagine soldiers look when they return from a war zone. Her lower lip trembled. "He said he was going to fix my attitude," she whispered. "He said Mom would have hated how I talked to him." My heart cracked in half. "No," I said. "No, baby. Your mom loved your fire. She loved your voice." She leaned into me then, collapsing like her body had finally remembered it could fall apart. I held her, her tiny frame trembling in my arms, and I felt every ounce of failure crush into my spine. I had left her. I had walked out that door thinking she would be safe. I had ignored her warning. And now, I buried my face into her hair and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." We stayed there on the floor for what felt like hours. The broken lamp cast jagged shadows across the room, like everything around us had shattered in sympathy. Eventually, I carried her to the couch and wrapped her in her favorite fleece blanket. Her body still flinched at every sound. I sat beside her, didn't speak, just kept my hand gently on her back until her breathing steadied enough to drift into a restless sleep. Then I got up and took photos. Her throat, the deep red welts, shaped like fingers. Her hair, the missing clumps where his grip had torn at her scalp. I took them all. With shaking hands, I documented what love should never become. I checked my smart doorbell camera, something I usually forgot about. It had captured the entry. Him buzzing Gloria. Her buzz back. The door opening. Him slipping inside. But no Gloria after that. I called her. When she picked up, she was in tears. "He told me you said it was okay," she said. "Said he was picking Mira up early for ice cream. He knew her favorite order. Said you were at the dentist." I didn't blame her. I didn't yell. She was just another person who trusted someone she shouldn't have. Like I had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, legal forms pulled up. I'd never filled out a police report before. Didn't know what half the terminology meant, but I figured it out. Line by line. Detail by detail. I typed until my eyes burned. I called the non-emergency line and asked what the next steps were. I followed them like scripture. The officer who came by the next morning was young, polite, but I could tell he hadn't seen much. He looked at Myra's injuries and quietly excused himself to call in a supervisor. By afternoon, a detective named Harper Kwan showed up at my door. She was calm, focused. Her eyes scanned the room like she was already rebuilding what happened. When she looked at the photos, she didn't flinch. But her voice lost its professionalism when she said, "We're going to make this right." And something in me began to breathe again. I had never hit another man in my life before that night. I'd been raised on restraint, on manners, on walk away before you escalate. But that night, when I saw Myra's eyes glaze over, when I felt her body go limp in my arms, I let go of everything that made me good. The line between survival and civility vanished. My father, the man who once taught me how to ride a bike, now lay slumped against the wall, groaning and holding the back of his head. "You're insane," he barked, trying to pull himself up. All she did was scream at me. I told her to shut up. She didn't listen. "Are you hearing yourself?" I spat, my voice unrecognizable in my throat. "She's 11. She's a child. She needed to be reminded who's in charge." I lunged again before I knew I was moving, but Myra's sob choked out behind me and stopped me cold. I turned to her. Her cheeks soaked, her eyes wide and confused and scared. She didn't need to see more violence, not from me. I knelt beside her again and held her tight. From the hallway came another presence. Delia, my mother. Her slow, padded steps. She didn't rush, didn't even look surprised. She paused at the doorway, arms crossed like she was admiring a painting that didn't live up to expectation. "What happened now?" she asked, voice flat. My father gestured at the wall. "He attacked me because I was disciplining his daughter. She needed discipline," she said, nodding faintly. "You let her mouth off. You've always been too soft, Malik." That's when it snapped. Fully, finally. I stood, turning to her slowly. "You watch him choke her." She raised her voice. I laughed bitterly. "And that warrants what? Being strangled in her own home?" "She's disrespectful," she continued. "You coddle her. Just like you always expected too much, needed too much. She's a child." I shouted, my voice cracking. Delia didn't blink. "And you're a disgrace," she said, steady, calm, cruel. "Letting your emotions dictate your life like always." It would have hurt more if I hadn't already lost all my respect for her years ago, slowly, through 1,000 little failures. This wasn't a betrayal, it was confirmation. She would always back the abuser, as long as it maintained a family image. She'd rather stand beside a man who harmed her granddaughter than admit she was wrong. "I'm calling the police," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "Really? You want to drag this through the mud? Embarrass everyone?" "I want to protect my daughter," I said. "From you. From him. From anyone who thinks this is how love looks." They didn't stop me. I picked up my phone, dialed, spoke with the dispatcher. Calm, methodical. I described what had happened, gave our address, explained Myra's condition. They said they were sending someone. When I turned around, my father was gone. The front door stood wide open. My mother stood in its frame, watching me like she was trying to memorize the face of her enemy. "Don't come back," I said. "Either of you." She didn't respond. That night, after the officers arrived and took our statements, Mira wouldn't let go of my arm. The responding officer asked if she wanted to talk to someone, but she only shook her head and pressed her face into my side. One of the EMTs gently checked her neck, documented the bruising, and whispered that I was doing the right thing. After they left, I sat with Mira on the couch, holding her while she trembled, her breath hiccuping as the adrenaline wore off. I let her watch cartoons until her body finally relaxed enough to sleep. Then I carried her to my bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin. I didn't sleep. Not 1 minute. I sat at the edge of the mattress, watching her chest rise and fall, feeling the guilt cling to me like a second skin. I had let him near her. I had ignored her instinct, her warning. And for what? To avoid conflict? To pretend the man who raised me wasn't capable of this? That was over now. At 7:03 a.m., I filed a formal police report in person at the precinct. The front desk officer took one look at the photos I brought and flagged down someone from family violence. They brought me into a small, windowless room where I filled out affidavit after affidavit. Statements. Descriptions. A restraining order petition. I included Gloria's statement. The call logs. The time-stamped video footage from the smart doorbell. Detective Harper Kwan met me in that room an hour later. She didn't shake hands. She just nodded, took the folder, and said, "I'll get it moving." I asked her what the timeline looked like. She didn't make false promises. "Depends on the DA. But we have enough to open a case immediately." The doorbell footage alone is hard to argue with. Back home, I packed bags. I couldn't stay in that apartment another night. Not with the image of my father standing in our living room still burned into every surface. I texted my tenants and gave notice. I called Gloria, who cried again when she heard what happened and offered her guest room. But I declined. Instead, I took Mira and we drove across town to my office. The place was quiet on weekends. I had a pull-out couch in the back room we used during overnight deadlines. I closed the blinds, turned off the buzzing fluorescents. Mira curled up under my jacket and fell asleep to the hum of the air conditioner. She didn't ask where we were. She just whispered, "Don't let them find us." And I promised, with everything I had left, they won't. By Monday, we had a new plan, new locks, new boundaries. I set up consultations with a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. I enrolled Mira in an after-school art program nearby, somewhere with vetted staff, security codes, and bright spaces. I started the slow, painful process of reclaiming her safety, one piece at a time. Delia tried to call once. I didn't answer. Troy didn't call at all. And my father? As far as I knew, he went to ground, too proud to admit guilt, too cowardly to face what he'd done. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I was building walls where there used to be bridges. That was the night I stopped being the peacekeeper. That was the night I realized peace had a price. And I'd been the one paying it for too long. So I lit the match. And I walked away from everything that once held me silent. The first thing I did was change the locks. Every door. Every window. Even the sliding glass balcony door that hadn't worked right since the spring rains. I paid extra for reinforced deadbolts and a digital security system with motion sensors and a camera that covered every inch of our hallway. Peace of mind didn't come cheap, but neither did trust, not anymore. We didn't go back to the apartment immediately. After 2 days camped out at my office, 2 sleepless, quiet, strange days of microwave dinners and couch blankets, I knew Mira needed more than just a change of locks. She needed to feel like we were safe. Safe wasn't something I could just declare. It had to be rebuilt. I texted Gloria and thanked her for the groceries she left at the office. She offered her spare bedroom again, and this time I accepted. For one night. Just one. Mira needed a shower that wasn't in a supply closet and a bed that didn't smell like printer toner. Gloria welcomed us like she'd been waiting all her life to protect something. She made hot chocolate, no questions asked. Mira curled up on her couch like it was made of clouds. While she slept, I opened my laptop and started filing everything properly. I'd taken photos of the bruises on Myra's neck and the small, inflamed patch where her hair had been yanked out. They hurt to look at, but I didn't let myself look away. Evidence. That's what it was now. Not a wound. Not a symbol. Just evidence. A pediatrician had done a full exam that morning and confirmed soft tissue damage consistent with physical assault. The pediatric psychologist I'd found through a grief support group added another layer. Clear signs of acute trauma response. I uploaded it all. Organized. Tagged. Indexed. This wasn't just a report anymore. It was a case. Detective Harper Kwan texted that same night. She had reviewed the footage. She'd reviewed the interviews. "We've got enough to open with the DA," she wrote. "You did the right thing, Mr. Rivers." I stared at her message for a long time, letting the words sink in like slow rain. You did the right thing. It had been a long time since I believed that about myself. The next day, I called my tenants and gave them 30 days' notice. Our apartment, was still in my name, still mine legally, no matter how many times my father had tried to undermine that. I didn't care if they complained. I didn't care if they left early. That place belonged to Mira again, to Leona's memory, to the only home my daughter had ever truly known. We drove over the next morning. I parked in our old space and looked up at the windows that had once glowed with warmth and now seemed distant, empty. Mira sat beside me in the car, quiet. Her hand rested on Leona's scarf in her lap. She hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. "You want to go up together?" I asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Then, "Can I unlock the door?" I smiled. Of course. We rode the elevator in silence. The hallway hadn't changed, but everything felt different. We reached the door. Mira punched in the new code herself, fingers trembling slightly, but she got it. The lock clicked open. She hesitated for half a second, then pushed the door wide. The apartment smelled stale, 2 months of vacancy sealed into the walls. Dust clung to surfaces, but the light that streamed through the living room windows still danced the same way on the floor. And Mira, after stepping in, just stood there, taking it all in. Then she walked toward her room, slowly, like retracing the steps of a dream. She opened her closet, still full of toys and clothes we hadn't touched. She pressed her palm against the wall where Leona used to tape up art projects. Her shoulders relaxed. I saw it. She was remembering this space not just as where it happened, but also where life used to happen. Joy, laughter, bedtime stories, safety. I walked to the kitchen and opened the cupboards. Half our mugs were still there, the chipped one with Leona's initials still sitting beside Myra's pink cat-shaped cup. I leaned against the counter and let myself feel it, this quiet pain and promise all tangled up. That night, we slept in our own beds again. Mira asked me to leave her door open. I did. I sat in the hallway for nearly an hour after she fell asleep, just listening to the rhythm of her breath. My phone buzzed once. A message from Harper. Court date pending. Likely this month. Judge assigned. Things were moving. The next day, Gloria met us at the door with a brown folder in hand. Statement, she said. What I saw. What I heard. In case the court needs it. She looked tired. Angry. Protective. The kind of tired you get from betrayal, not years. They'll listen to you, I told her. She shook her head. They better listen to Mira. Over the next week, I gathered everything. Doctor's statements, psychologist notes, text logs, the video, Gloria's written account. I sent it all to Harper. She said she. Meanwhile, I tried to stitch our daily life back together. I took Mira to her art therapy sessions twice a week. She painted mostly in blues and purples. Still quiet. Still tentative. But when she finished a canvas and looked up at me for approval, I saw it again, that flicker of something returning. Maybe not trust in the world yet, but in me. That was enough for now. The apartment slowly came alive again. We aired it out. We vacuumed. We repotted the wilting spider plant Leona had once sworn was unkillable. Mira picked out new curtains, lavender with little sunflowers stitched along the hem. She chose them herself. I didn't correct her when she called it her healing room. I just hung them while she watched. Every small step felt like protest. Like telling the past, you don't get to take this too. And when I sat at my desk one evening, exhausted but awake, I opened a blank document and began typing. I titled it, Widowed, Not Weak. It started as a paragraph, then a story, then a chapter. I wrote about Leona, about Mira, about silence and screams, about the day love turned into survival. I didn't plan on sharing it. But the more I wrote, the more I realized people needed to know. Not just about what happened, but what came after. The courtroom smelled like dust and old wood, like nothing had moved in there for years except lives being shattered and remade. I sat with Mira on the bench beside me, her small hand wrapped around two of my fingers. She wore a dark blue dress she picked herself, simple but neat, with the sunflower beret clipped into her hair like a silent badge of courage. I looked down at her and nodded once. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away, either. That was enough. My father entered through the other side of the room with the same stiff military posture he always carried like a shield. His face was shaved. He wore his old service blazer, the one he used to wear to parades and barbecues on the 4th of July. There were medals on the breast pocket, as if they could vouch for the kind of man he was. I heard someone behind me murmur, "Must have been a hero once." Once. That was the word that stuck. My mother followed him in. She didn't sit with us, didn't glance our way. She took a seat on the opposite bench like we were strangers, her purse clutched like a life raft. Troy didn't show. No surprise there. Family loyalty had always been selective. Harper Kwan sat in the first row behind the prosecution's table. She gave me a small nod when our eyes met, and that was the only comfort I had in that cold, hollow room. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ellis Price, stood like she'd been waiting her whole career for this case. Calm. Surgical. No theatrics. Just facts. The trial started. They played the video first. Footage from my smart doorbell camera. No editing. No narration. Just raw truth. My father dragging Mira into the house by her arm. Her voice raised. His low growl in response. Then silence. The prosecutor paused it just before the door closed. A few people in the audience shifted. A cough. A gasp. Ellis Price turned to the judge. And what followed, Your Honor, is why we are here. Then came the photos. Myra's throat. The missing clumps of hair. The statement from her pediatrician. The psychologist's analysis of trauma response. Gloria's sworn affidavit. My police report. And then, Mira. I didn't want her to testify. God knows I would have spared her if I could. But Harper said her words, if she felt ready, would matter. That it wasn't about forcing her into the light but giving her the power to step into it. So when Ellis asked if she'd like to speak, I looked at Mira and waited. She stood up slowly. The courtroom hushed. She walked to the witness stand in slow, deliberate steps. The clerk asked her if she understood the difference between truth and lies. Mira nodded. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake when she said, "Yes." "Tell us what happened," Ellis asked gently. "Only what you want to share." Mira took a breath. "He came to the apartment. Said Daddy told him to pick me up. I didn't believe him, but Gloria let him in." She paused. Her fingers fidgeted in her lap. "Then he got mad, because I didn't want to talk to him. He told me Mom wouldn't like me anymore. Then he grabbed me." "Where?" She touched her neck, instinctively. Ellis waited. "Did he say why?" "Because I yelled." "But I wasn't yelling. I was just scared." Myra's voice dropped. "He wouldn't let go." That silence afterward, before Ellis thanked her and told her she could step down, was the kind that said more than any testimony. No one needed to hear the rest. I stood up to meet her halfway, pulled her into a hug as she returned to our bench. My heart was pounding in my ears. I whispered, "You did everything right." She whispered back, "I just wanted them to believe me." They did. My father's attorney tried to spin it. Blamed old habits, wartime discipline, claimed he'd misjudged the emotional fragility of a grieving child. But it fell flat, especially when Delia was called to the stand and confirmed, under oath, that she witnessed the act and said nothing. When asked why, she shrugged. "We raise our kids firm. That's how we did it in my day." The judge didn't even flinch, just kept scribbling on his notepad. By the time closing arguments ended, I couldn't breathe properly. Every word felt too heavy, every second too loud. I held Myra's hand as the judge returned from chambers. He didn't drag it out. 3 years, he said. No parole. No contact. He turned to my mother. 6 months probation for complicity in a minor's endangerment. And a permanent restraining order. For both parties. The gavel came down. That was it. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like pulling a nail from the skin. Necessary, but not clean. My father didn't look at us as he was led out. He didn't yell. Didn't beg. Just walked like a man convinced he'd been wronged. My mother left without a word. No apology. No tears. Just the click of her heels fading down the hallway. Outside the courthouse, the sky was gray but dry. Mira looked up at me. "Is it over?" I crouched down to her level, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "The worst part?" "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't want to be scared at home anymore. You won't be, I promised. Never again. And I meant it. We went home and lit a candle for Leona. Mira placed it in the kitchen window, the same one where she used to sit and watch her mother bake. The flame flickered gently, casting a soft glow on the glass. I think Mommy would be proud, she said. I looked at her, my brave, resilient girl, and nodded. I know she would. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it gave us permission to start again. Coming back to the apartment wasn't like turning a key and slipping into familiarity. It was something else entirely, like walking into a space that had held both heaven and hell and choosing to claim it again. The echoes were still there. The good ones. The bad ones. But they no longer owned us. The locks were changed, the paint refreshed, and for the first time in a long time, the air didn't feel tight in my lungs. Mira stepped in ahead of me. She didn't hesitate. That was new. She took off her shoes at the door and walked straight to her room. Her lavender curtains were drawn open, the sunlight catching on the little sown sunflowers she had picked out. She'd started calling the room hers again. Not Mommy's room, not the quiet room, not the place where the screaming stopped. Just hers. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the table where we used to sit every Saturday morning and eat waffles with too much syrup. I touched the counter where Leona once danced to old soul music while flipping pancakes. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel the weight of it, but because this was no longer a place for weeping. It was a place for rebuilding. That night, Mira and I had pizza on the floor. No plates, no formalities. Just greasy fingers and juice boxes. She told me about a book she was reading about a girl who made armor out of feathers. It's kind of dumb, she said, but also kind of brave. I smiled. Sounds like someone I know. She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. After dinner, we rearranged her bookshelf. She pulled out the ones she'd outgrown and made a donation pile. Then she carefully lined the bottom shelf with the books her mother used to read to her, like they were artifacts, not bedtime stories. I didn't interrupt. Watching her take ownership of her space again was more important than any routine I could enforce. By the end of the week, we were in a rhythm again. Not the one we used to have, but a new one, ours. I made breakfast. She handled her backpack. I walked her to school and kissed her forehead without fear she'd pull away. She didn't. Not once. The blog started small. I'd begun it during our nights at the office, just a way to pour out everything I couldn't say aloud. I titled it Widowed, Not Weak, thinking it would just be a private place to exhale. But Harper encouraged me to share it. You don't know who you'll help, she'd said, or who might help you. So I did. The first post was raw. I wrote about Leona's smile, Myra's scream, and the first night I sat in a police station and said the words, he hurt her. I didn't hold back. I didn't soften it for comfort. And maybe that's why it resonated. Comments trickled in. A mother in Oregon whose daughter had been silenced by a grandfather. A father in Georgia fighting for custody from a complicit spouse. An older woman who said she'd spent 30 years wondering if what she endured counted as abuse. They all said the same thing. Thank you. I responded to every single one. Mira knew about the blog. I let her read it before anything went live. She didn't always want to. Some entries were too much. But when she did, she'd point to sentences and say things like, that's true, or you forgot to say how cold the floor was. She became part of it. A quiet co-author in our own story. We made new rules for the apartment. Simple ones. No yelling, not even during sports. No secrets, unless they were surprise gifts. Every room must have something that made us smile. In Myra's case, it was drawings taped to the fridge, doodles of sunflowers with superhero capes, a bluebird with my face. In mine, it was a coffee mug Leona bought that said, you make mornings bearable, which now sat on the counter like a crown. One Friday evening, we baked muffins. Leona's old recipe, the one with nutmeg and grated apples. Mira wore her mother's apron, which nearly dragged on the floor. I handled the oven. She handled the mess. The kitchen smelled like autumn and hope. Want to try putting this on the blog? I asked as she licked batter off a spoon. She thought about it, then nodded. But only if you say I cracked the eggs perfectly. You did. And that I didn't get shells in the mix this time. Even better. That post was our turning point. It wasn't about pain or courtrooms. It was about reclaiming joy. About saying, this is what healing looks like when you fight for it. And again, the responses came. One woman wrote, I haven't baked since my sister died. Maybe I'll try again. A widower commented, my son still won't touch his mom's books. But maybe one day. Another post. then another. A community started forming not of survivors, but of architects. People building lives from the rubble. Mira called them our blog family. I like that. Harper came by once, just to check in. She brought cookies and news that my father's appeal had been denied. He'd served the full sentence. My mother had moved to a quiet suburb and was, by all accounts, alone. Do you feel relieved? Harper asked. I looked at Mira, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a sunflower blanket over her shoulders. I feel light, I said. Like we finally moved into our lives again. Before she left, Harper paused at the door. You should speak publicly, she said. Share your story beyond the blog. I shook my head. I'm not a speaker. You're a father, she said. That's enough. Maybe she was right. That night, I sat at my desk and scrolled through every post. Each one was a step. Each one proof that the silence had been broken. And in its place, something better had taken root. Not the old version of life, but one that belonged to us. The lights were too bright on stage. I hadn't realized that until I was already standing there, palms slightly damp, staring out at a room full of strangers who were now impossibly quiet. Folded chairs filled every row. Men and women in suits, jeans, hoodies. Some with strollers parked beside them, others alone with notebooks in their laps. The sign above the projector screen read, The Heart of Fatherhood, National Conference 2023. And somehow, I was the closing speaker. I cleared my throat once, glanced down at the podium where my notes sat untouched. I didn't need them. My story was too deeply etched into me to require bullet points. I used to think strength meant silence, I began. I thought the best thing I could do for my daughter after her mother died was keep everything in. Be solid, stoic, reliable. But grief doesn't reward silence. It grows in it. A few heads nodded. Someone in the back murmured, She was 11 when it happened. I continued. My wife, Leona, was the kind of woman who lit up a room without even trying. She boarded the 7:15 train to Milwaukee and never came home. An accident. Headlines. Shock. I didn't cry at her funeral. I was too busy trying to hold up our daughter, Mira. I paused, looked toward the front row. She sat there, Mira, knees crossed, sunflower beret holding back her hair, her eyes locked on mine. Not embarrassed. Not nervous. Just proud. She gave me the smallest nod, like she was saying, Go on, Dad. I thought losing Leona was the worst thing that could ever happen to us. And then came the second blow. This time from the inside. My own father. The man who raised me with tough love and colder silence. He came into our home one night when I was out at a client dinner, and he attacked Mira. Physically. Brutally. Because she raised her voice. Because she talked back. The room held its breath. I came home to find his hands around her neck. Her face red. Her voice gone. And in that moment, I stopped being the man who avoided confrontation. I stopped being the good son. I became a father with fire in his veins. I looked at them, these other parents, survivors, social workers, teachers, men trying to do better. Some of you may be here today because you're looking for tools. Others because you're looking for hope. Let me give you both. The moment you choose to believe your child over tradition, over reputation, over bloodline, that's the moment you become who they need. Applause started slowly. I wasn't finished. I filed a report, took pictures, pressed charges, testified in court with my daughter sitting beside me. The man who raised me went to prison, and I don't regret it for a second. Now the applause was steady. But again, I raised my hand to quiet them. This isn't about revenge, I said. This is about protection, about reclaiming power for those who had it stolen in silence. I took a breath. I started a blog called Widowed, Not Weak. I thought I was writing it for myself, but people started reaching out. Mothers, fathers, children, people who never got their day in court. People still living with the ghosts of what their family didn't want to acknowledge. I looked down again at Mira, her hands folded neatly in her lap. There was no fear in her anymore. Just calm, like she knew her truth would never be hidden again. I'm not a perfect parent, I said, voice softening. But I learned that parenting isn't about knowing everything. It's about showing up, especially when the world is loud and cruel. Especially when no one else does. A man in the third row wiped his eyes. A woman behind him reached for his shoulder. I didn't know these people, but they knew me. Because pain is universal. So is love. I closed my notes, though I hadn't used a word of them. Thank you, I said simply. The applause this time was loud. Real. I stepped off the stage and walked straight into Myra's arms. She hugged me tight. Not like a child afraid of the world, but like someone who'd already faced it and decided to live anyway. You didn't let him break me, Dad, she whispered. No, baby, I said, because they don't get to write our story anymore. She leaned back to look at me, her face glowing with something rare, something I hadn't seen in months. A smile. Not forced, not polite, but full, bright, real. The moment she smiled again, the world shifted. Later, after the conference, a few parents came up to us. One woman asked Mira if she'd ever write something for the blog. Maybe, she said, shrugging. If Dad stops hogging all the good stories. That night, back at the apartment, we celebrated with ice cream sundaes. No occasion, just the fact that we were home, and we were healing. After Mira went to bed, I stood on the balcony alone, looking out over the city. Lights flickered in 100 different windows. I thought about the version of myself that once stood here and believed survival meant isolation. He was gone now, and in his place was a man who knew that being whole had nothing to do with being unbroken. Inside, the sound of Myra's laughter drifted from her room. She was watching an old cartoon Leona used to love. I closed my eyes for a second and let it wash over me. The story we were building now was messy, imperfect, and stitched together with moments just like that. Soft, ordinary, sacred. And this time, we were writing every word ourselves.